Soft whispers can often lead to the hardest realities you will ever have to face. Experience our smooth, velvet-toned narratives that hide a sharp edge of truth and cinematic intensity. Join our community today and hit subscribe to feel every layer of the story.
I didn't plan to speak at my daughter's funeral. I hadn't planned most of what happened that week, if I'm being honest. But when I sat in that front pew and felt her husband's hand land on my shoulder, heavy, proprietary, like he was already measuring the weight of what he'd inherited, something in me went very still. Not the kind of still that comes from grief. The other kind. My daughter's name was Rosalind. She was 41 years old, and she had the laugh of a woman 20 years younger, loud and unself-conscious, the kind that turned heads in restaurants. She'd gotten that laugh from her father, God rest him, and she'd passed exactly none of it to her children, because she never had any. That had been a grief of its own kind, one she carried privately, the way she carried most things. What she had was her work. She'd built a financial planning firm from a rented desk in a shared office space in Atlanta to a real company with 14 employees and clients, who sent her Christmas cards and called her by her first name. She'd done it without a business loan, without a wealthy family, without anything except the particular stubbornness she had inherited from me. I am 67 years old. I was born in a house without indoor plumbing in rural Georgia. I have buried a husband, a sister, and now my only child. People who look at me see an old woman with bad knees and reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her head. They think I am harmless. That is, as it turns out, the most useful thing about me. Rosalind married her husband 6 years before she died. I will call him what he was, a mistake. His name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that he was handsome in a way that made him careless, and charming in a way that made him dangerous. And my daughter loved him with a completeness that made her, in that one area of her life, not quite herself. I saw it from the beginning. That is the burden of being a mother. You see things. You say them once, maybe twice, and then you keep your mouth shut and you pray. I prayed a lot those 6 years. He had been between jobs when they married. In transition, he called it. The way men like him always do. He had ideas. He had contacts. He had a brother-in-law somewhere who was going to bring him in on something. None of it ever materialized into anything you could deposit in a bank, but my daughter's salary certainly could, and it did, and I watched him grow comfortable in a life he had not built. I noticed when she stopped mentioning a particular colleague, a woman she'd spoken about for years, someone she'd hired early on, someone she trusted. The name just quietly disappeared from conversation sometime in the 3rd year of her marriage. When I asked, Rosalind changed the subject in that way she had. Smooth and practiced, the way you steer a car around something in the road without your passenger feeling the jerk of the wheel. I didn't push, I filed it away. Rosalind died on a Tuesday in November. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia. She had no prior history of heart trouble. She was 41 years old, and she ran 4 miles 3 times a week, and she ate the kind of careful diet that made her roll her eyes at herself when she described it. The cardiologist called it one of those tragic, unpredictable things. Her husband cried at the hospital in a way that looked right. I stood next to him and I held my granddaughter, my daughter's niece, actually, a child Rosalind had been guardian to after her sister-in-law passed, and I did not cry. Not because I wasn't broken. I was broken in a way I don't have language for, even now, but something didn't sit right, and when something doesn't sit right with me, I go quiet. I've been that way my whole life. My mother used to say I got scary quiet when something was wrong. She meant it as a warning to herself. The funeral was 4 days later. It was a Saturday. The church was full. Rosalind had that kind of life, full of people who genuinely loved her, and the flowers were extraordinary because her employees had organized them, and they knew she loved white flowers. Calla lilies, gardenias. The whole sanctuary smelled like a garden. Her husband sat beside me in the front pew. His new suit was very fine. I remember thinking that, noticing the fabric, the way it fit. He had gone to some trouble for his appearance. There's nothing wrong with that, I know. People grieve differently. But it sat in my mind and stayed there. The eulogies were kind. 2 of her employees spoke. Her college roommate flew in from Portland. A client of 20 years, a man who'd been with her since the shared desk days, stood up without being asked and said she had changed his family's life, and he wanted that on record. And then the man sitting next to me stood up. He talked about Rosalind for 7 or 8 minutes. He talked about her strength, her drive, how much she'd accomplished. He used the word legacy 4 times. He said he intended to honor her memory by ensuring her firm continued to thrive. That was the word he used. Intended. Present tense. Forward-looking. I sat very still. After the service, in the reception hall adjacent to the sanctuary, he found his way to my side. He did that thing where he put his arm around my shoulders from behind. A half embrace. The kind you give someone when you want to appear warm without offering anything real. He said, close to my ear, that I shouldn't worry about the firm, that he had plans, that Rosalind had trusted him completely with everything and he was going to make sure her work continued, that I could focus on recovering and let him handle the rest. He said, she left everything in good hands. I said, is that right? Not a question. He didn't notice the difference. He squeezed my shoulder once and moved away to accept condolences from someone else. And I stood there holding a small plate of food I hadn't touched. And I thought about my daughter's face the last time I'd seen her alive, 3 weeks before she died. We'd had lunch. She'd been distracted in a way I'd attributed to work stress. She'd reached across the table at one point and held my hand for a moment longer than usual. And she'd said, Mama, you know I love you. And I'd said, of course I knew. And we'd talked about other things. I drove home from the funeral alone, the way I'd come. And I sat in my kitchen with the lights off for a long time. Then I made a list. The first thing I did was call Rosalind's accountant. Not the firm's accountant, her personal one. A woman named Bet, who had done my daughter's taxes since she was 26, and who I had met at various holiday gatherings over the years. I had her number because Rosalind had put together an emergency contact document for me years ago. One of those practical gestures that feel morbid when you receive them and invaluable later. Bet was careful on the phone, professional. She said there were things she couldn't discuss with me, which I understood and expected. But she also said something she perhaps didn't mean to say, that Rosalind had called her in late September, 6 weeks before she died, with some questions about asset protection. Asset protection. I thanked Bet and I let her go and I sat with that for a while. The second thing I did was drive to Rosalind's office. Not her house. I wasn't ready for that. But the office where her assistant, a young man named Theo, who had worked for my daughter for 3 years, and who had cried so hard at the funeral that his girlfriend had to walk him out, let me in without my asking and made me coffee, and sat with me in Rosalind's office and answered questions. Theo had been with her the day she called Bet. He remembered it because she had closed her office door first, which she rarely did, and when she came out she'd asked him to pull together certain files. He'd assumed it was a client matter. The files were about the firm's ownership structure. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. But I raised a daughter who became both fluent in the language of money and careful about what she put in, writing. And some of that fluency had rubbed off on me over the years the way things do when you love someone enough to pay attention to what they love. What I understood from what Theo showed me and what I slowly pieced together over the following 2 weeks was this. Rosalind had started the process of updating her estate documents in October. The process had not been completed when she died. The documents that existed, her will, her beneficiary designations on the firm's accounts, were older. They reflected her life before certain things she'd learned. Before, I believed, she had understood something about the man she had married. The third thing I did was visit a lawyer of my own. Not a fancy one. I didn't need fancy. I needed thorough, and I needed someone who would take me seriously, which in my experience is not always guaranteed when you are a 67-year-old black woman who shows up somewhere without an appointment wearing her funeral clothes because she hasn't quite gotten around to changing back into regular life yet. The lawyer I found was a woman about 10 years younger than me who had gone to school on scholarship and had built her practice the same quiet, determined way my daughter had built hers. She took me seriously. She listened for 2 hours. At the end, she said, "If what you're describing is accurate, there may be questions worth asking about the circumstances of your daughter's death." She said it carefully, but she said it. What happened next took 4 months. I want to be clear about what those 4 months were like, because I think people imagine investigations as something dramatic, all late-night discoveries and confrontations. It wasn't like that. It was slow and it was quiet, and there were many days when I sat with the particular loneliness of doing something alone that you would have, in any other version of your life, done alongside the person you were trying to help. I hired, with the help of my lawyer, a private investigator, a woman, retired from the county sheriff's office, who had the kind of permanently calm expression that I found immediately trustworthy. She did not promise me anything. She said she would find what was there to find and tell me the truth about it. The truth took time, but it came. My daughter's husband had, for the better part of 2 years, been in a relationship with the woman whose name had disappeared from Rosalind's conversations, the colleague. They had been careful enough that Rosalind had not known, or had not known fully, until sometime in the late summer before she died. The investigator found evidence of the relationship in the kind of digital traces that people leave when they believe they are being private. Emails, on a personal account, receipts, records of an apartment that neither of them claimed on paper, but where both of them could be placed. The investigator also found, with the help of a forensic accountant my lawyer brought in, something in the firm's financial records. He had access to certain accounts. Not full authority. Rosalind had never given him that, but access that had been granted early in their marriage for convenience, for bill payments, for the kind of administrative intimacy that marriages sometimes develop. That access had been used over approximately 18 months to move money, not dramatically, not in ways that triggered automatic alerts, carefully, patiently. Small amounts, varied intervals, into an account that traced back, eventually, to a holding entity with a name that meant nothing and an address that was a mail drop in Delaware. Rosalind had found out. That was what the late September phone call to Bet had been. That was what the files about ownership structure had been. She had found out, and she had started to do something about it, and then she had died. I gave everything to the investigator. I gave everything to my lawyer. I made sure every document was copied and stored in 3 separate places, one of which was a safe deposit box at a bank branch my daughter's husband had never visited and didn't know I used. I am methodical. I get that from my mother, who kept every receipt from every purchase she ever made in a shoebox under her bed, and who died with every one of her affairs in perfect order. I made a phone call to the detective who had signed off on the death investigation. I made it through my lawyer, so it was received properly. I asked for a review. I used the word toxicology in a sentence. I was polite, I was specific. I did not raise my voice. They found digoxin. It's a heart medication. In the right dose, it manages arrhythmia. In the wrong dose, administered over time to someone without a heart condition, it causes one. It is, as the medical examiner explained to the detective, who explained to my lawyer, who explained to me on a Thursday afternoon in March, while I sat in her office with my hands folded in my lap. It is very difficult to detect unless you are specifically looking for it. They arrested him on a Friday. They arrested the woman from the firm, who had known what he was doing to Rosalind's finances, and had said nothing and had, it was later determined, helped him access records that made it easier, on a Monday. I was not there for either arrest. I was at my kitchen table when my lawyer called. I was drinking coffee. I had been awake since 4 a.m, the way I often am now, because sleep is a different country than it used to be, and the border crossing gets harder every year. I said thank you and I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time. The sun came through the window over the sink, the same way it always has. The coffee went cold. The trial lasted 11 days. I attended every one of them. I sat in the same seat each day, second row on the left side, and I watched. He did not look at me after the first morning, when he had walked in and found me there, and I had looked back at him with nothing in particular on my face, just me. After that, he kept his eyes elsewhere. The financial evidence was presented for 2 full days. The forensic accountant was patient and clear, the kind of witness who answers questions with the exact number of words required, and not one more. The amount taken from my daughter's firm over 18 months was $437,000. He had moved it through 4 separate layers before it reached the Delaware account. The medical examiner testified about digoxin, about the levels found in the tissue samples that had been preserved, by some procedural good fortune, from the original autopsy, about the timeline, about what it looked like, from the outside if you weren't looking for it. The jury took 3 days. He was convicted on charges of first-degree murder, fraud, and financial exploitation. The woman from the firm was convicted as an accessory and for her role in the financial crimes. Sentencing happened 6 weeks later. He received life without the possibility of parole. She received 19 years. I heard both sentences. I was in my seat, second row on the left. I didn't react, not because I wasn't feeling anything. I was feeling everything, all at once. The way you do when something you have been moving toward for months finally arrives, and you discover that arrival and closure are not the same thing at all. I walked out of the courthouse into a gray April afternoon. My lawyer walked with me. We stood on the steps for a moment and she said, "You did that." She said it quietly, matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. I said, "Rosalind did that. I just paid attention. My daughter's firm still exists." She had a succession plan. She was always prepared. And her senior partner, a man who had been with her for 9 years and who sobbed openly when the verdict was read, has been running it. Theo is still there. The client who spoke at her funeral, the one who said she had changed his family's life, he's still a client. The money that was stolen is being recovered through civil proceedings. It will go back to the firm. It will go to the employees who depended on what Rosalind built. That's what she would have wanted. I know that like I know my own name. I am 67 years old and I have bad knees and reading glasses perpetually pushed up on my head. And I raised a daughter who was smarter and better than the people who thought they could take what she'd built without consequence. She trusted me enough to reach across a lunch table 3 weeks before she died and hold my hand a moment longer than usual and say, "Mama, you know I love you." I knew. I still know. I just made sure the rest of the world understood what that meant.